Hi everyone, I think the feed is working. So today I'm going to chat about these three watercolour paintings at some point in proceedings. But the main topic of the stream is I'm going to add some watercolour to this line drawing of a donkey inspired by an animal at Cotley Farm, I think it was, in Devon. So I've used Unipin marker for this one, which is a water resistant ink. So these Unipin markers, they're kind of fine line markers, and they come in a range of nib sizes, but they're very inexpensive, but I think excellent quality. So well worth using. Now, before I get going, if you saw the previous live stream, I was working on this painting of a lady down at the beach sitting on the rocks reading her book. And I did just add a couple of, I can't remember exactly what I did on the live stream, but I did just add a couple of finishing touches. So in particular, I'd put the eyes in behind the sunglasses. I don't think I'd added the lipstick or the nail varnish. Those are minor details, but the eyes do help, make it look like she's reading. But the other main thing was these cast shadows were very blue, and they still are, but I have added a kind of some hints of a reddish purple there to add a little bit of warmth to that cast shadow. And then this one's up on my website, and if I can judge it about right, I think I cropped, so there's the full painting. I think I cropped it about there down at the bottom, so it's almost a square format for the finished work. And then these other two I'll come to in a bit, and we'll chat about those. My plan is to chat about those while the paint's drying, basically. So let's get going. I've selected a few brushes. I'm going to start with this chunky mop brush. Holds plenty of water, so I'm just going to begin by wetting the background to this drawing. This is A4 mixed media paper that I'm using here, and I'm not being overly precise about it, but I'm basically applying water around the donkey but not on it. And if there are a few gaps between my water boundary and the animal, excuse me, between the water boundary and the animal, that's okay. And equally, if the water trickles across into the donkey, that's okay as well. So we don't have to be too precise, but it's going to control a little bit the watercolor, is my hope. So I'm starting with my this is a Winsor & Newton Cotman watercolor kit, and you can see I've got some colors left on the lid here from the last time I used it. But what I'm going to do to begin with is I'm just going to grab, sticking with this big brush, a little bit of this cad yellow in here, if I can just get that activated. And there's the donkey is standing in a barn on top of some straw or hay, whoops, and I just wanted to put a little bit of a highlight in there. Now I've obviously flooded, I can't see all that well the amount of water I've put down in this light, but I've obviously flooded the paper with a little bit more water than I perhaps intended, but we'll go with that and see what we can make work. Now the hay, is, as you might expect, is a mixture of colours, so I'm putting a couple of dashes of yellow in there, and then what I'm going to do is use up, got a bit of yellow ochre there which was dried on the lid, so we'll put some of that down into the background, and there's a bit of a green here, so we'll put some of that down as well, and let the watercolour do its thing for the most part. Now I suspect I'm going to lose some of that yellow up there. I don't think I want that because as I said, the animal's in a barn, and the planks of the wood in the background are actually horizontal. I've got a bit of a lump of dried watercolour there, we don't want that. But I'm going to do what I feel is better for my painting. So with that in mind, I'm going to keep the background fairly similar in colour to the reference. So it's going to be fairly sort of brownish. Let's get some, I think that's burnt sienna in there. Let's get some of that on the go. And I think I've got a bit of something similar dried on the palette. That might be raw umber on the palette, but as you can tell, I'm not too fussed at the moment. And what I'm actually going to do, rather than mimic the the vertical brush, the horizontal brush strokes, I'm going to put in some verticals. And if I get bits of dried watercolor in here, as you can see I am, I don't actually mind for that, because that's going to add a little bit of texture to the background. Now I'm going to mix that up a bit, jump a bit, and come down here and dip into some of that yellow. So I don't want things to be too even. And then what we'll do is change the colour a touch. So I've got a little bit of orange there left on the lid. So let's activate that with the wet brush. See if that looks a bit, doesn't look all that different, does it? I think I've got some in the pan there as well. That's a bit more like it. So really I'm just varying the colour, that's all I'm doing at the moment, of the background, just so that it's not too one note in terms of tone. And I'm keeping all the tones relatively light at present. So now I think some of those bits of watercolour are perhaps a little bit heavy. So let's lift off some of those, and I'm probably going to lift off some of the paint as well, but again, that's okay. We'll get some interesting effects. So I'm just using a paper towel here. Yeah, okay, I'm fairly happy with that. And now that I've done that, what I'm going to do is, while that background wash is still wet, I'm going to look at the animal and think, well, where is the light catching the animal the strongest? So while I'm chatting, let's just fill in that wash a little bit there. And around those areas of the animal, I'm going to make the background a bit darker, so we can start to establish a sense of light just with the background. That's the hope. So let's see if I can, let's move some of that away and avoid some of those bits. Dip into this raw umber here. And I've got some ultramarine blue. Oh, actually, I've got some on the lid there. Let's grab some of that. There we go. That's a fairly nice dark colour. So around the ears here, the light is catching, so we'll put dark near those and try not to get too much paint on top of the donkey itself. The head is also fairly light on the right hand side and up the top here. And of course what I can do is, if I lose some of the white on the donkey, I can always come back in with a bit of white acrylic or something to add a few highlights. And I think that's all I want to do for the moment with the background. I'm not sure I'm that happy with the darker colour I've put on, but it's not too bad. So I'm just washing my brush out at the moment. So I'm going to let that dry a little bit. And while that is drying a touch, let me just talk about one of these other paintings. So this one here was inspired by a walk in the winter, I think, down at Sidmouth, which is a coastal town. So it's actually the same location as the woman on the rock reading the book. It's just a different beach pointing in the different direction. So this is not an exact representation of Sidmouth. So for example, there are red cliffs at Sidmouth, but they're not quite that bright red. And then I haven't copied the fields, and the buildings are not exactly depicted. But the colours are fairly representative of what was going on in terms of the multitude of colours and the cloudy sky. There are these sort of rust-like orangey browns in the water there. There are lovely greens in the water as well. And then the sand obviously has a multitude of colours, especially the wet sand with the reflections and so on. So I think that's got a nice feel about it, this one. It's nice lightness of touch. I haven't got too fussy with it, so I enjoyed painting that one. So let's. I don't think I'm going to have. You'll get bored if I let that dry completely. So let's move on. Okay, so let's switch to a slightly smaller brush, and we'll add some tone to the animal. So we've gone kind of orangey in the background. This donkey is actually white. So I'm going to begin by grabbing some of the ocean blue there. If I can get that going. There we go. And I'm just going to squint at my subject and think, well, where are the big shadow shapes? And obviously I've helped myself out a little bit with my line drawing because I've put in some hatching, which is going to help me find those shadowy shapes. So the blue's obviously a complementary colour to the oranginess of the background. So sorry if there's a bit of background noise. It's such a hot day today. I've got the big window open, so you may be able to hear the comings and goings of people outside, but such is the reality of life. Okay, so add a bit of blue to this leg down here. Now I've only just I knew I'd missed a bit around the ears there, but the background wash really is too far away, so I'll have to address that later, but I don't want to dive in just yet. So that started to add a sense of light on the animal. Now the shadows are fairly bluish on the animal. Some areas of the shadow are somewhat darker than what I've done so far, so what I'm going to do is keep going. So what I'm going to do is keep going with that ocean blue, but make a bit more of an intense wash, and we'll pick up some ultramarine blue as well. Just a touch of this violet that I've got in that pan there. And within those shadows, I'm going to look for the darker parts. And then my hope is, whoops, my reference has just disappeared. There we go. My hope is that we'll get some nice automatic mixing of colour with the wet in wet, and it'll provide some subtleties of tone within those shadows as the watercolour does its own thing. Okay, so just looking at my reference and thinking, well, what can I do next while I've got that blue on the palette? I don't know why I washed the brush out, really. I guess I could have not bothered, but what we'll do is just mix some green in with that blue. Another bit of green there that's dried on the palette. Get some of the raw umber and mix that in. And we'll put the beginnings of some cast shadows in here on the floor. Just picked up a bit more of the raw umber, and I've got this kind of weird pattern here, so in the wash. So I just thought, maybe this animal isn't in a barn, maybe it's outside. We don't need to be too precise about where it is. So okay, I'm fairly happy with that so far. Just going to grab a tube of, this is Windsor Orange. And what I'm going to do next is switch to this little frayed synthetic brush, flat brush. Pick up some of that orange and mix it in with that shadow colour that I had. Now that's way too bright, so I'm just washing the brush out a bit. Yeah, overcooked that massively from what I want, but we'll see how it goes down. So where the light's catching the white of the animal, there are actually some hints of orange, but they're pretty subtle. So as you can see, what I'm doing is just using the very tips of the brush to feather down a few kind of brush strokes which consist of a multitude of parallel lines. And it's quite a nice way to work because you're sort of drawing onto the painting but still using the brush, and by curving those lines you can kind of describe the contours of the animal. And in addition, you can see I've done it here and here and here. I like to carry those drawing marks across the boundary between the highlight and the shadow area. I just think it adds a nice bit of variety of mark making to the finished image. So here what I'm doing is I'm just drawing out from the still damp shadow wash, and that's mixing with what's on the orange, and that's a nice way to get a neutral, which is also in keeping with the rest of the painting in terms of the colour harmony, because you're mixing the neutral up from two of the colours that you've used already. Now I think the shadow between the ears could do with being a little bit darker, so I'm going to go, I haven't washed the brush out, but I'm just picking up just a little bit of ultramarine blue. So put that shadow in there. And then let me just stick this brush in the water. Okay, so I'm going to let that paint do its own thing for the moment. Sorry about my voice, I'm not sure what's happening there. Let me just get a quick drink. Okay, so the other painting I wanted to show you today is this one. So this was actually inspired by the seafront at Exmouth on a winter's day. And I was actually sat in the car. My wife had new welly boots with lots of colourful dots on them. And so she was out walking along, and this isn't an exact representation, by the way, of Exmouth seafront, but you get the general idea. There are sort of distant hills, cloudy, stormy sky, stormy sea, and then the seawall is actually quite a bit higher than this, but it was kind of wet, and she was trying out her boots in the rain. So I just took a quick photo from the car. So that's what inspired the painting. But something interesting happened from my point of view. So these two figures were off in the distance, and I just sketched them in walking the dog as a little afterthought. This is a pretty good representation of the lampposts down there. They're styled after sort of old-fashioned lanterns. And this was all painted with watercolour and a brush, apart from the coloured dots on the wellies, which are little dots of acrylic. But the yellow of the lantern, I just did that with watercolour marker. As I did, I think for some of these figures, I filled them in with watercolour marker. And what I found was, no offence to my wife, but the favourite part of this painting for me is that bit, without the person with the wellies in. I just think it's just a nice quiet image of a couple walking their dog, even though the weather's, not the nicest. I don't know, it's just, I think you can sort of read lots of things into it. So what I've done on my website is I've offered that as the original and as prints. But then if people want to, they can buy a print. I'm not framing it quite right, but you get the idea. They can buy a print of that section as well. But the idea, it's not a new idea. Obviously, it's just one I haven't used in a long time. The idea of painting down watercolour and then using the watercolour marker on top, I really like the way that looks. So that's something, as I say, I haven't done it in a while, but I'll probably do some more of that. Right, so do we have anything more to say about this donkey? Let's have a look. So I'm fairly happy with how things are looking. I do need to just add a little bit more definition here and there, I think. And then I don't know if I'll be able to do it in the stream, but once it's completely dry, I'll probably go over it again with pen. But what is missing at the moment are some little bits of pink, I think, and purple within the hair of the animal. So the nose in particular could do with a bit of pink. Now that may be a bit tricky to mix up with the watercolour. Let me just make myself a clean bit of palette here. Oh, hang on a sec. Let me just look in my collection of tubes and we'll see if we've got some magenta, because that might give me the, I'm not sure I have. No, we'll go with what we've got in the kit. So switching to this brush now. So another round, but it goes to a nice fine point. So if I grab some of that there, that's not going to be too far off if I mix it with the orange, I think. Maybe some of the permanent rose. Maybe some of that cadmium red. That's not too bad. If I just put a very thin layer down, I think that will be okay. So we'll put a bit of the pink. It's a little bit blood red, isn't it? But if I just dab some of that off. Oh, that's not too bad. That's not too bad. Won't go too crazy with it. A little bit of pink around the nostril there. And then a little bit in the ears, perhaps. So I'm looking more now at the drawing in terms of what I feel it needs rather than the exact reality of the situation. And this brush goes to such a nice fine point that if you want to put in some fine lines, then it can handle that no problem. Okay, so the next thing I want to do then is put in some real dark darks with this same brush. So I've got some neutral tint here, which is kind of dried on the palette. So I'm going to mix that in with the orange that I had on the lid. And then we'll use that to enhance some of these shadows, but also add a few bits of texture to the straw. And then one of the things you can do when you're adding dark areas to something like straw is, you know, here I've kind of painted in, I haven't been exact about it, but you could say, well, that's a piece of straw, that's a piece of straw. The other thing you can do is paint in little negative shapes if you think about it. So you can paint in little triangles. You can say, well, I've got a light bit there. I'll paint in a shadowy shape under that, and then leave a gap, and then another shadowy shape, and then I'll change it again. And all of a sudden you've got 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 bits of straw on top of each other. But maybe if you feel that's not quite working, then you just put a random line through it. So there's lots of ways of just creating a sense of randomness and you know, some nice interesting textures as you do it. Now, what I do want to do is I've got some rather hard edges here between the blue and the white, so I want to soften those a bit, but I want to do it with a little bit of a different colour to what I've used for the most part so far. So what I'm going to do, now this colour is a very, very strong colour, this violet. So I'm just going to make that very dilute. So not sure how well this will work, but you know, the whole point is to experiment a bit. So let's just sweep that in down there. So I'm deliberately going over some of the areas that have dried already so that I get that multi-layered effect. So the colours that I'm putting down, you know, obviously I'm mixing some colours on the palette, but in addition to that, just the layering of different colours gives you kind of an optical mixing. Just mixing up some more of that violet. So this region needs to be in more shadow than it is. That's perhaps a bit dark though. Then let's grab a bit more of that same colour. And use that to add to the shadows on the head. Okay, so I'm just wondering how dry this background wash is and whether I can afford to, still a little bit damp, whether I can afford to come in and put in some darker shadows on top. Notice also I've got some of the blue has run there. I think that bit's probably dry enough that what I can do is come in with my Unipin marker. You may remember, I think I tried to do this the other day on a watercolor painting. It worked okay, but you've got to be careful not to go in too early, because otherwise the ink bleeds. So always best to test it if you can in an area of the drawing that's not too important. So this is a, if I can get it into focus for you, that's a 0.1mm nib. So what we'll do is, where that little accident has happened and the watercolor has bled, I mean, there aren't really any accidents in my work, not because I'm so skilled and I can see what's going to happen, not at all, but just because I kind of work in a loose way, see what I get, and then I kind of adapt to it rather than going with an exact plan. So you can see with the pen, I can turn those little bits of blue which bled into bits of hair on the donkey's belly. So just trying to think what to do next in terms of the body. So I think what I'm going to do, I definitely need to tidy up this wash in the background in some way, but I think some of that I can do by just converting the little gaps between the original line drawing and the wash into the rough hair along the back of the donkey. I think that's probably the most efficient way to do things. And then keep going with that idea and gradually work our way into the wash that I suspect is too damp, mostly to see what the ink's going to do. It seems to be behaving itself fairly well. So but I definitely need to fill in here, because I've lost the silhouette a little bit of the top of the head, and maybe put some highlights in there as well. I'm not sure. Yeah, with a bit of acrylic. We'll see. Let's darken that eye a bit so it comes to life a bit more, hopefully. But now that the paint's drying back, it's not looking too bad. I'm not 100% sure about the strength of the blue of this this shadow. Just wondering whether I need to soften that by putting some more blue of a paler nature next to it. It's not too far off from reality, but because I've deviated from reality in other areas, I think perhaps something's getting a bit lost there. I think I'm going to use, where I've got the ends of these parallel, don't know how well you can see that. Can I get a bit closer? So yeah, where I've got the ends of the brush strokes there that I put down with that frayed brush, you can kind of use those to say, oh, okay, I'll enhance those little bits. And it's a nice way. And it's a nice way of creating randomness in the mark making that perhaps I wouldn't have done if I'd just been left to my own devices. So let's see what we can do with this background then. Where's it gone? Where's my brush? Oh, brushes. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll grab some of the orange and mix it in with that violet. So I've got something fairly close to what I had before. And so that what I'll do is I'm filling in the gaps, as you can hopefully see, but I don't want it to look too much like I filled in the gaps, so I'm going to extend that area of tone. So I quite like the way that's working, so I'm going to do that again. Let's get a bit more of that orange, touch of the violet. Whoa, too much of the violet. I did mention earlier that it was a strong colour, but then I completely forgot myself. But what we'll do, we'll make use of that. So while I've got that stronger colour on the brush, the light's really catching the back where it goes up at an angle towards the rear end. And then similarly, I could use some of that in here, fill in that little gap in the line work. And I'm deliberately randomizing my marks and changing my brushwork so that things don't look too regular. I think we'll add a bit of that to the background down here as well. I quite like the overall effect that that's giving in contrast to the way the drawing has been treated. So let me see if I can frame that a little, excuse my fingers there, frame that a little tighter for you, so that you can sort of see the drawing or the painting now almost as it would appear when framed. So hopefully you can sort of see that that's brought that to life in what I think is a fairly interesting way. I think I still need to subdue these shadows a bit though. The blues, they're perhaps a bit bright, a bit dark, aren't they? Let me see if I can put this camera back in the mount. Well, that worked far better than I was expecting it to. Actually, to be fair, in real life, these are paler than they're coming across on camera. So this one in particular, on camera, as I'm looking at it at least, it looks very, very dark. But it's not actually too bad in my opinion. Trying to think what I can do to just soften that a little bit. I could just try and lift it out a bit with a clean brush. Perhaps we'll do that. So switch to just a flat synthetic brush, clean water, well, relatively clean water, and then I'm drying that on a piece of paper towel and then dipping it back into the water. Now you have to be, if you're using sort of watercolor paper to do this, it's not that big a deal, but I'm using mixed media paper. And mixed media paper is fantastic stuff until you scrub the surface of it, in my experience at least, and then the surface is very fragile to being scrubbed when it's wet. What was I saying? So yes, very, very fragile to being scrubbed when it's wet. So far more so than watercolor paper. So something to be aware of. You can damage the surface of your drawing quite badly if you go at it in a crazy way. So I tend to avoid this technique on mixed media paper if I can. But I'm being very gentle, and it seems to be working okay. So I think for the purposes of this little demo, I'm going to leave that there for now, and we'll see what it looks like when it's completely dry, and then I may add a few modifications, and if I do, I'll try to remember to show you on the next stream, like I did with the lady reading her book down at the beach. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this one. Thanks very much for watching, and I hope to see you